Hi, friends, and welcome back to the Thriving Teens podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about a topic that sounds very sappy, but it's really important, and it is self-compassion. And I never thought I'd be making a podcast episode about this topic. A year ago, I probably would have laughed at the word self-compassion, and I didn't really understand it. It wasn't really something that I had. I'm going to be going through the consequences or things that made me realize I needed a lot more self-compassion and how it's benefiting my life now, and practical steps and how I started implementing self-compassion. So I just want to give you guys some background on me and just my personal development journey over the last few years. So I would say when I was like 11 and 12, I didn't even really know the word productivity. I never listened to any business podcasts. The word entrepreneurship was very unfamiliar to me. It actually took me a while to even be able to spell entrepreneur correctly, and now it comes really easily to me because it's a word that I probably type at least on a daily basis, right? But I just want to give you guys some context. I really was not in that world at all. A lot of times after school, I just come home, watch YouTube on my iPad, and eat goldfish. So I haven't always been like productive, and sometimes it's weird for me to hear things like, oh, you're gonna have such a bright future, you're so brilliant, you're so smart, because when I was younger, like middle school and earlier, I was never really considered smart or like I was above average in any really certain area. So I think when people are like, oh, how are you so disciplined? It's like, I really wasn't born that way. But when I got into self-development, it was in an earlier phase where it was less publicized on social media. Like, I would say Gen Z started getting a lot more into self-development during COVID times, and I feel like there's been new trends like having a soft lifestyle, and self-compassion and mental health is emphasized a lot more. But when I first got into self-improvement, I was consuming a lot of very like macho man type business life advice, and it was very cold turkey type vibes, and I definitely think that I brought that mindset onto just how I viewed my life, and didn't realize that yes, it's good to think with your head and to operate from logic, because it can be very dangerous just to follow your emotions and let them take you wherever you go. But also, like too much structure in one's life really is not healthy, especially for the feminine soul. So I think sometimes when I hear another girl be like, I've been trying so hard to do this, but I'm failing, like I keep on messing up, it's, I wouldn't say triggering for me, but it just reminds me so much of like my past self. And those are words that I'll still say sometimes. Like, I really have tried, again, I'm using the word tried. I am trying to eliminate. Why am I using the word try? I don't really like the word try, because in the past I remember using it a lot, like, oh, like I've been trying to do this for months, I keep on messing up. Kind of just this guilty, shameful, like, I can't do this, I can't figure it out. Why can't my life be in this perfect structure, right? And I think it's important to think logically and have certain systems in your life, but when it comes to the point where it's like so all-consuming, it's just not serving you anymore. And this podcast episode is specifically for the girls that feel like they say those words a lot in their life, and that they feel like they want to be so structured and it's just not working out for them. Because if you're watching this and you really have not tried to implement any structure in your life, it's probably not going to be helpful, because I'm going to be giving you advice on implementing less structure, and that's probably not going to help someone that has no structure at all. But I really know you girls that are in my DMs a lot and will send me a paragraph about your self-improvement journey, that you do hold yourself to a very high standard. And I held myself to a really high standard too, and I think a specific area of my life that I noticed myself holding myself to such a high standard is my faith, my religion. And it's hard to talk about like religion, faith, and I'm just going to talk about this specific period of time. I don't want to get into it too much, but I would say like for a couple years, I was just very legalistic about my faith, very much like I need to be the perfect Christian, thinking about all these rules and everything. And it really just made it worse that I was also public facing with my social media too, because it's like people would ask me for advice on their faith, and I already felt like at school, oh, I need to be so nice and so bubbly all the time because I post myself a lot on the internet. There's negative stereotypes around people that do content creation, creators. They could be called arrogant, or I've always felt like I needed to be very bubbly because I didn't want to feed into that stereotype, or I never wanted someone to be like, oh, Annie looks so mean. She looks so intimidating, because I remember getting so many comments from even like loved ones, right? Not coming from a bad place, but like, oh, you just seem really intimidating because you've achieved so much. And I'm like, oh dang, like I can't control what I've achieved in the past. I can't undo any of those things, right? So I think it got me in my head a lot. So I kind of tried to overcompensate with just always trying to be so friendly and bubbly. It almost made it worse that I kind of imprisoned myself in this, oh, but I need to be a light to the world, right, as a Christian. So it's just like I already felt like I need to be really friendly to overcompensate for my perceived negative stereotypes on creators and influencers, public figures, whatever you call them. And then it's just like being this bubbly Christian, just like those two together, just a really bad combination. And it was really only, I think, this summer when I took a step back and I realized like I was expending so much energy to just uphold this image that I created for myself. Like it was a prison I created for myself. No one ever told me, oh, like, Annie, you need to be a lot nicer at school, or, oh, you're sitting all the time, like, you need to stop. No one ever really made these judgmental comments to me. It was just self-imposed, and I really think it just came from a place of not truly loving myself and feeling like I needed to rely on other people's validation to love myself. And I think once I started building a more confident relationship with myself, I'm like, okay, so why am I doing these things? They're clearly not serving me. They're not helping anyone else. Because I would try to be so friendly, right? But some people, if they just don't like you already, you constantly trying to be friendly to them, most of the time it does not make them like you better. My personal opinion. So it's just like I'm expending all this energy that is not yielding any results because I literally imprisoned myself in this state of mind where I care so much. And I actually don't even want to blame my past self because this kind of goes into self-compassion. I have so much empathy for the place that came from because I didn't truly love myself and I didn't understand that it's okay for other people not to like you, or it's okay for you to be misunderstood. So it's like I don't even blame my past self because I understand where that came from. And I think just literally remembering we are so young. Thriving teens, right? This podcast, like, I'm 16. Like, I remember being 12 and going through things that in the moment I thought they were just stupid, and I'm like, oh, that's stupid middle school things. And now I look back at it and I'm like, I would never want to put my future daughter through that, or I wouldn't wish that upon a friend, So it's like I have compassion for why I felt the need to do those things. And I don't blame my past self because I had to do those things, or it like brought me to where I am now. I think one of the mistakes that I made in my self-improvement journey is when talking about my journey, I feel like I was very like, past Annie, she was terrible. We don't want to be like her. And it's like, yes, I'm evolving, and I don't really use my past self, like me from like 6 months ago or a year ago, as a reference for how I want to move forward. But it's like I needed to be like that to be able to build any just type of life for myself. And it's like now I can choose to live differently, but I can't discredit things that past Annie did. So I think that's a huge part of implementing self-compassion, your self-development journey, just understanding sometimes you needed to be that person to get to where you are now, and not to blame her, right? Because some of you guys might kind of be in the stage that I was, where you're just really neurotic and just very much in like the brain space and not in a spiritual or emotional space. And I think sometimes that's necessary, because I think back to COVID times, right, where I really self-isolated, focused a lot on my business. I'm like, would I have been able to focus on other things if I haven't done that, right? Because I think about my time in high school. I realized junior year, I was able to focus a lot on my academics and not worry too much about developing my extracurriculars, because freshman and sophomore year, that's like what I did. I did that so much. So junior year, when academics were hitting me like a truck, I didn't really have to think about the extracurricular part. And that was a huge blessing, right? So it's like, can I really blame my past self for doing that because it's serving me now? So I don't feel a lot of regrets on how I've lived in the past. It's very difficult to know if I recommend that lifestyle, and I get in a lot of like philosophical existential crises because I really love when you guys send me very sweet messages like, oh, you're very inspirational, I want to be like you. It's so kind. And I think about my past self, right? Like, I'm really grateful for the sacrifices that she made, but it's like, would I prescribe that to you? Would I recommend that to you? I don't know, right? So I think we all have to understand that our individual life path, it's just going to be different from other people's. I'm not going to tell you to follow my footsteps or not, right? Like, I think you need to let your Holy Spirit guide you in those situations. In general, going back to the piece of just realizing how young we are, sometimes I talk to my friends, and I think this is like a very common expectation put on Gen Z, that we're supposed to be like spoke people for society, or we're supposed to have it all figured out. We're supposed to never accidentally step on someone's toes, never accidentally say the wrong thing. I just don't think that's a realistic expectation. I really don't hold myself to that standard anymore. It's like, yes, I want to be responsible with the content that I put online, and I really try my best to do that. I have conversations with my editor of like, if there's things that I say that are not going to be perceived correctly, or you think that we need to have a conversation, like, please let me know, because I am 16. I am still figuring things out. But I just no longer expect myself to be perfect. But yes, in the ideal world, I would love to respect everyone and for my words to never be taken out of context. But it's just so sad that as teenagers, we feel like we have to be perfect. I don't know. Like, I just don't really hold myself to that standard anymore, and I've just kind of lowered the bar. And I actually think it's just made me a lot happier, because I've recognized there are stages and seasons to life. I think a huge, setback with social media and how accessible information is now is that it's very just difficult to even know how old you are. Let me explain. So social media content, for the most part, is pretty accessible, right? Like, it's totally possible for me and a 26-year-old to be viewing the same exact content. And there's not really barriers to entry. Like, I know if your parents set limits on your phone, or if you have like YouTube on the made for kids option, there will be certain things that are limited. But I'd say most of my friends have all content types accessible to them. It's like, what you consume becomes a huge part of who you are and how you think. So it's like, if a 16-year-old and a 26-year-old are consuming the same content, like, does anyone really know how old they are anymore? You know, I was listening to Madison Beer's song called Dear Society, and she talks about she's felt like she's been 21 since she was 17. And said thanks to all the magazines, which I think the song was written kind of maybe in the late 2010s or whatever. But now I think that's more applicable to just general social media platforms. It's like, no one really knows how old they are anymore, which is why I think as teenagers, maybe we just place such a high expectation on ourselves, because we're taking all these like life issues that people in their early 20s, let's say, have, and we're like impressing them on ourselves. Like, I think there's a huge trend on social media of like being in your 20s, right? Being so confused about like what's going on in life. And I think at times I unconsciously started to like develop that onto myself, because it's kind of a romanticized idea, right? Like, in my 20s, like, it's a really interesting forming part of life. And I have a lot of friends that are in their 20s, so I also think that's a part of it, that I kind of just started to subconsciously take on their struggles. But I did realize, like, I have 10 years to be in my 20s. Like, I'm in my teenage years now. Like, I can fail. You know? Like, if a business fails, it's just a nice extracurricular to have on my extracurricular list. And yes, that comes from a very like blessed and privileged place to even have the mental capacity to think about starting a business, right? Because I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like, if you don't have basic shelter and food, it's very hard to think about self-actualization and trying to level up your life, right? So I think that's important to take into consideration. But I think just realizing you will only be a teenager once, right? It's like, why do I have to take life so seriously now? Like, I actually want to appreciate the fact that other people want to take care of me right now in this season of life. And letting people do that. Just letting myself be the child in the family. Like, I literally realized I am an adolescent girl in my family. Like, I'm actually expected to have the least responsibility. Like, why am I giving myself all these assignments, right? I think sometimes we're so busy trying to understand the assignment that we don't even realize, was that assignment for you? Anyways, next part of self-compassion that I want to talk about is conversations that we have with our younger selves and conversations that we have with our older selves. This is gonna get, like, weirdly spiritual. I can't really just, like, this is just not, like, a logic conversation that we're having. But in terms of conversations with our younger selves, I am in so much gratitude and admiration for, like, 8-year-old Annie and, like, 6-year-old Annie, because she was crazy. No, she wasn't crazy, but she was very playful. She loved to perform, she loved to sing, she loved to dance, and I haven't been able to pinpoint specific moments in my life that maybe caused me to feel like I needed to repress that. But I don't know why. Like, I think when I was in middle school, I felt like I was improving by kind of shutting off that piece of myself. I didn't really openly perform a lot. And I think part of that is just as my social media started to become bigger, I felt like, oh, because my internet life is so public and I'm always performing online, like in person, I should be quiet and reserved. But it's like, that was so inauthentic to me, because before any of my social media got bigger, when I was like 6, I was just crazy, you know? Whenever I was in China, I was always doing weird things in public. And not that I'm trying to do weird things in public now, but I realized that was never something I had to get rid of. Like, why did I view that so negatively? So as much as I learned from my future self, have conversations with, like, what would my best self do? I actually learned so much from my younger self. Sometimes I actually have to ask myself, like, what would younger Annie do? Because younger Annie was not so scared of rejection. She wasn't so scared of expressing how she truly felt. You know, when she really appreciated someone, she wasn't afraid to express love, to give someone a hug. And so many times, I talk about this in my past episode, when I talk about comparison and how to stop comparing ourselves with other girls, sometimes you have to act in alignment with the feeling that you want to feel before you're actually experiencing that feeling. So for me, a lot of the times, I will challenge myself to express love in new ways that I'm unfamiliar with and haven't done in years. Like, that could literally be calling someone cute or, like, calling someone attractive. Like, I don't think I did that, like, since I was a little kid. And maybe there were just experiences I had in the past that made me feel like that was not okay. I'm not really sure. But I cringe at myself a lot. Like, every single day, I'm constantly doing something to push myself out of my comfort zone to kind of return back to that primal state where there's less societal conditioning. And I feel uncomfortable all the time. But, like, I cringe at myself sometimes, and I still choose to do it because I realize I'm cringing at myself because of my own insecurities, right? Because this is so uncomfortable for me. But I'm like, what would the most healed version of myself that has released their ego do? They're not scared of rejection because they don't take it personally when other people don't receive what they're sending out, right? So I think just, like, returning to that younger state and actually really appreciating younger Annie and everything that she went through. And I think it was spending a week with kids. I volunteered for Vacation Bible School and was one of the crew leaders, and I had a few kids in my group. And just being with them, I was with, like, a couple 6-year-old girls. I love them so much. They're so sweet, and I realized I was only 2 years older than them when I started my YouTube channel. And I think about them putting themselves out into the internet, just vulnerable to judgment. And I'm like, that is so scary, right? And I don't regret that I did that, right? Because I've met so many amazing people, and I'm so happy about the impact that we've made through Thriving Teens, through the main YouTube channel, and through so many other social platforms. I'm so grateful for this impact that our community has made. But I do think about objectively, right? When I view my life, it's like, yes, I started social media when I was 8. And I think sometimes when we're just in our own head and own perspective, things seem so normal. And I think that inhibits a lot of self-compassion because we just get so desensitized to the challenges that we have in life. And I think there's also just, like, a spectrum, right? It's like self-compassion and then victim mindset. You know, I don't want to fall into the, oh my gosh, life has been so hard, and just not do anything about it. Because sometimes I do just, like, get mentally confused or exhausted about how I even present myself on social media or how much of my life I want to share. And this is probably something I'll get into in a separate episode, but putting yourself on social media is a different challenge once you start to become a little bit older as a girl. Because when I first started, there was just a lot less fear. And I almost feel like a born again creator, right? Because it's like you guys are kind of watching me like go through puberty and like grow up. And that's kind of scary, right? Because I had a realization a couple months ago. I'm not going to be this 12-year-old, 15-year-old student girl forever. Like, that's not sustainable. That's not the life I want to live forever, right? But it's also really scary to change and for people to see you change, right? Even if the feedback is positive, it's still scary. And this might also be another topic I talk about in an episode, but for the last few months, I've been focusing a lot on my mental health and doing a lot of healing and going back in the past and literally reliving trauma. Like journaling about like how did that moment make me feel, going deep down into the layers. And I just wanted to focus on my mental health. I just wanted to feel better. I just wanted to do better. I didn't really I started going to the gym consistently because I was like, this is a way to show myself that I prioritize myself. And scarily enough, I just by accident started to lose weight. And this is a sensitive topic, so just trigger warning, I'm going to be talking about changes in your body image. But it's really weird because I've never really been conventionally like fit in my life. I don't really want to talk about my body like a specimen. Anyways, we're just not going to get into that. But it was really weird for me because I'm like, my body looks like in a way where it's never looked before. I don't recognize myself anymore. Like, I would take a lot of selfies every day or look at myself in the mirror a lot, and I would get mad at myself because I'm like, Annie, that's so narcissistic. Like, you need to stop looking in the mirror. Like, you suck, right? I was getting so mad at myself. But then, again, I had to zoom out, view myself in third person, and this is kind of what I'm going to get into about conversations with your older self because, again, having a lot of friends in their 20s, they tell me about their high school years, and they're like, oh, I wish I just, like, gave her a hug, right? So it's like, if I have the privilege to get insights from people who are in their early 20s or late 20s, like, might as well just apply that to my life now, right? Like, if that could save me some heartache, why not implement that now? So I started thinking about how would my older self view this situation? And I realized objectively, it's like, that's normal. Your body and face is changing so much. Like, you don't even recognize yourself anymore. Like, I don't blame you, right? It's like I was struggling so much to grip onto reality, and I don't really know the medical term for disassociating, so I'm not trying to use it medically, but I just really struggled to feel like I was in reality. Like, I think I was just taking a lot of selfies because, like, the next day I needed to look back at that picture and be like, oh, this is, like, real life. Like, this is like the 3D world. Now, this sounds so crazy, but it's genuinely how I felt because I never even thought I was on a weight loss journey. Like, that was not an intention at all. So it's like, once it started happening, I almost was trying to fight against it. I was like, oh, should I just, like, randomly eat more food? But it's like, I'm not even hungry right now. Like, I think that healing a lot of my past trauma really changed or helped me get rid of a lot of the negative, unintuitive eating patterns I had. So it was like I was kind of going to self-sabotage because I'm like, now I'm so uncomfortable. Like, all these changes are happening in my body and I didn't ask for it. But when I looked at it from that third-party POV, I was like, yes, like, you didn't ask for something and it's changing a lot. So of course you're going to be confused. Like, of course I would look in the mirror because you're just baffled and you just don't understand what's going on. It wasn't something that you expected. So that has helped me so much because if I stayed mad at myself, if I was like, oh, Annie, like, how could you be doing that? Like, I think mentally it would be so bad. Where it's like now, like, yes, I try to have the awareness, like, even though you're confused about your physical appearance, your body, that's not you, right? You are like a soul. So, like, it's okay to feel a little disconnected or, like, a little confused. Like, it's okay if you want to take a lot of mirror selfies or do whatever you're doing. But just remember that's not everything, right? So it's a very balanced approach. It's like, let's not take a full victim mindset where it's like everything you're doing is okay. Because I don't think that's constructive either. But I think I was just on the extreme side of the spectrum where I was just not cutting myself any slack. And now I think I have a lot more grace for myself, and it's really helped me. Which I want to get into the practical steps on how you can start implementing self-compassion. And I think as I've kind of gone through personal anecdotes and insights that I picked up so far, you could kind of be able to formulate some practical steps already, but let me just try to consolidate my thoughts on what we've talked about so far. So I think the conversations with your younger self is really important. Just like for a while, my phone wallpaper was a picture of my younger self when I was like 6, because I needed to remember what it was like to be her, and I needed to remember that an older version of me will look at pictures of me now and feel a similar way to how I currently feel about my 6-year-old self. So I think that was really beneficial. The past is very blurry, right? You can't actually pinpoint a ton of moments that happened when you were 5. At least I can't. But I think even going back to those just middle school moments, right? Where you're in this awkward phase of growing up and you just want other people's approval. Like, I think for me, understanding where did that desire for approval come from? Why was middle school so hard for me? And literally reliving through all those moments of rejection. And that hurt a lot. Like, it was just very uncomfortable. And I think, like, I was doing a lot of this mental health work, like, very intentional, like, journaling, and, like, April and May, and I would just come home and be like, mental health work. I journal for, like, an hour or something. And it wasn't something that I saw as conventionally productive, right? Because it's like, the output is not going to be very clear, right? It might come months from now. Sometimes you don't even realize that you're healed from something until months later. But it was really that work that helped me. So definitely do the inner work. And it's going to be scary to look back at those moments. You're going to feel stupid, right? It's like, oh, what's the point of rehashing something from 3 years ago? And I think something we also need to be more kind to ourselves about, especially as teenagers, is it can feel so stupid to be like, oh, that moment in middle school traumatized me. Because when I think about middle school, I think about, like, Diary of the Wimpy Kid. It was just, like, such a funny concept, right, middle school. And it just feels so stupid to be like, oh, I was so hurt back then. But it's, like, you're literally 16, so what other experiences do you have to reference? Like, if you need to go back to the middle school trauma, like, just go do it. So it's going to feel really uncomfortable. But I personally think it's very wise to go back to this recent trauma, because heal from it now, okay, before you're, like, 25 and you're, like, just trying to recall, like, I think something that's helped me a lot with having older friends is I can kind of learn from some of their mistakes. Obviously, I'm still going to make mistakes. I can't be like, oh, I'm just going to follow all their lessons. I'll be perfect, right? Like, I'm going to perfectly prevent myself from getting hurt, because that's just not possible. But I think anything that I've learned from them who maybe have gone into therapy when they're, like, older is, I think it's always better to start earlier, or to start working through these things earlier. Because it just becomes accumulated debt, right? When you just don't address trauma, it's just, like, bubbling up to the surface. And one day, maybe the whole pot will just burst open. So I would just encourage you guys, even though it's uncomfortable now, it usually gets more uncomfortable as time passes. And it gets very difficult to even, like, understand or recollect things that have happened in the past. And definitely don't get stuck in it, right? Like, there were some days where I was doing a lot of journaling and it really affected me mentally, where it's kind of just like, for days, I would be just, like, shook about something, because I felt like I was coming to these, like, scientific discoveries. I was like, oh, I never knew that affected me so much. And for the next few days, it felt, like, weird, like, just walking around the house. I was like, oh my gosh. And that's normal, right? But definitely take it slow, right? Because I would not wish that upon anyone else, for that to happen for, like, a week, right? If mentally for a week I was just in this daze of, like, oh my gosh, middle school. Like, don't get stuck in the past, right? Like, I think the whole point of revisiting the past is that you can, like, seal it up, right? And be like, these are the lessons I've learned, instead of that, like, the past affecting your current decisions. So now it's like I feel a lot more gratitude for the past instead of a fear of the past. Because I think when you haven't explored your past, you know it's, like, scary, but you just don't want to open up the box. Because it's scary, right? So, yeah, definitely exploring the past, even when it feels stupid. Even when you're like, oh, like, there's no way I could have been affected by that in middle school. Search a little deeper. Actually see. So, yeah, that's number 1. Don't be afraid of the past and to look a little bit back into your younger self and who she was before negative impacts of society or traumatic moments. And then I would also say conversations with your older self, right? I don't really know exactly who my older self is, right? I don't know what career she's in, who she's married to, if she has kids. I don't know those things, right? But I do know that my older self would feel compassion for my current self and look back at high school and be like, oh, that was silly. Like, I wish that I gave myself more compassion. So I think sometimes I need to detach from the present moment and just realize, like, oh my gosh, the world is so big. Life is so big. This is like a grain of salt. I definitely think that's a privilege, I think, of growing up on the internet, is I've been able to meet a lot of people from different states, from different countries. So it's like, when I think about the world, like, I don't think about my state. Like, I literally think about, like, the globe. Like, I think about, like, like, I actually envision the globe a lot. This conversation is getting so unhinged, but I'm so serious right now. Like, I'm so serious. Like, you know when astronauts go up in space and they show this POV, or you just see, like, the whole world? Like, when I view life or my future, like, I actually view the whole world, like, all 7 continents, Antarctica included, because it's like, I've had conversations with people from different coasts, different time zones, and I feel so much gratitude for that. Like, no matter the pressures of growing up on the internet, like, there are so many blessings that come with it, and that's definitely one of them. Or it's, like, easy for myself to remind myself, okay, this is high school, but, like, this is the whole world, because I've had exposure to the whole world. Not the whole, like, not all countries, right? But you know what I mean. Like, I've had exposure to different coasts and such, and I know that most other high school students, or some, don't have that experience. And it's really important to understand that it is a privilege and it is a blessing. But I want to remind you guys that that doesn't mean that objectively it's not true, that the world is so big. And, like, whenever you just feel like you're hyper fixating on a moment or get really stressed, like, I don't know if it's going to help you or not, but please trust that it's such a small glimpse of the world or your life or what you're going to look back on. And I would just say, in terms of just staying unbothered or, like, stress levels, and I also want to preface that this is coming from the context of a summer podcast episode. So, like, right now I'm not in school, I don't have tests going on, so maybe my mindset will change once the school year starts. So that's important to address. But my threshold of what I'm willing to get stressed about has gotten a lot higher. Like, a lot higher. Like, it has to really, like, threaten a significant part of my life for me to feel really stressed about it. And just understanding what's in your control and what's not, and being okay with releasing what's not in your control. Oh, another practical thing is sometimes I'd actually, like, write to myself, my journal entries, like, Annie, I'm so proud of you. Like, you know, and I would actually give myself reality checks. Like, I'd be like, Annie, this is in your control and this is not. So it's kind of like that higher self talking to the current self. I think it's really beneficial to have these, like, different versions of yourself that have conversations with each other. There's the higher self that's disconnected from ego, right? Like, I have a very, like, we have, like, a higher spiritual self that doesn't care about the things on this earth, like, I don't know, what you're gonna get on your AP scores, right? My higher self doesn't care about that stuff, right? But it's like my flesh, my current earthly being, does care about that stuff, right? So it's like I constantly have to have these conversations, like, with the higher self that's like, Annie, like, I promise it's not that important. And I'll be like, but it feels important. And I'll be like, no, but trust me. And I'll be like, okay, I'll trust you. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, as humans, we're never going to be perfect, right? So it's like sometimes you have to accept, you know, my flesh wants one thing, but ideally my spirit is telling me something. I'm going to choose to trust it. So I think it's just, like, a lot of, like, conversations with yourself, because I'm not, like, a perfect being, you know. A lot of the times my first initial thought is like, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed. But it's after I have a conversation with the higher self that I'm like, oh, like, it's gonna be okay. But I think those are all the practical steps that I have for you guys in this episode. I just hope that it can serve as encouragement and also just affirmation to, if you feel like having more grace for yourself is gonna make you less successful, let me just tell you that's not true. Like, I've experienced the most abundance in my life now, having lowered the standards for myself, actually. So I hope that can serve as a testimony or some type of hope that you don't need to always be so uptight to be successful in what you're working towards. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast episode. It was definitely a little different than others. I don't even want to say it's unhinged because these are just my honest thoughts. So I hope you enjoyed. And make sure to follow the Instagram at Thriving Teens Pod, because I've been a lot more active on there. We post reels and shorts that summarize a lot of the recent episodes. But I love you guys so much. I want you to comment in the comment section down below a message that your higher self is sending to your current self. So I literally want you to say your name. Like, for instance, Annie, I'm so proud of you right now. Remember X lesson. I'm just really curious to hear what you guys have to come up with. I love reading your guys' comments. But yeah, that is all I have for today's episode, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Much love.